Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one is for K412, Day of the Colossus, second last episode of the book, and we'll be doing the finale tomorrow. So yeah, the rewatch will finally be coming to an end tomorrow, and yeah, we'll discuss more about the plans for afterwards in the next video. But anyway, Day of the Colossus, I think it's a pretty good episode. It's obviously very action heavy, but it still has a few character moments, and I think it all kind of works quite well. The fights, like, you get to see obviously the Benders do a lot of really big moves, a lot of teamwork moves, clever plans, and just to see how kind of unstoppable this Colossus is. Nothing is working, and then all the while in the background you have the original plan to face the Colossus with the Dragonfly Hummingbird suits. It sort of has to be like, okay, we have to use the prototypes, but we can't get them working as well as the normal ones. Hiroshi has to be brought in, and you know, that plan comes into fruition, and that ends up being the last big plan. So I think it is, there's perhaps not a ton like within the episode to discuss because it's so action heavy, but I think it is a very good episode. So I'll start with the character scenes because that's where most of the discussion is going to come from. And I suppose let's get into Wu first. So this is one of the things where, like, towards the end of the book, they really do start to get Wu right. And that is just seeing him care about the people of Republic City, of the Earth Kingdom, of course. And you see some of his kind of odd personality quirks actually come back in a sort of more positive way. Like his bad singing comes back, and it ends up being that the Badgermoles actually really like it, which is a fun, I suppose, maybe reference to, you know, the Cave of Two Lovers with like Chong and the Nomads type thing of like their singing, like according to Sokka at least, is meant to be like bad singing, even though I think the fandom loves it, and I do too. But Badgermoles seem to like kind of unusual music more than anything, so that was a fun reference to have that come back again, and that be the key thing of how he, you know, gets people out of there, and how he went from being like the biggest coward in the world to just how he steps up against the Earth Kingdom like guards who come in with the mech suits is really, I suppose, showcasing a level of like, okay, like there's something to him. Like they've been giving him this arc of like he could end up being a worthy king if they absolutely have to put him in place. Could you make the comparison of like, okay, he's related to Hu Ting. Is this like Hu Ting had her moment where even defenseless, basically, she still stood up to the Red Lotus. She was killed, but she stood her ground against them. Is this kind of Wu demonstrating that at a core level that Earth Kingdom royal family line has a bit of backbone to it? Is that what they're going for here? I'm not really sure if they were even thinking about that, but it ends up kind of working well on that front. Yeah, just Wu being successful here in that if they asked people after what's happened here, I think a lot of people would probably say yes to him, but he realizes that things need to change, as we'll see in the next episode. But what was presented here was, I think, a solid enough arc. Does it justify the amount of, I suppose, focus on him in the earlier episodes of this book, when he was kind of pretty annoying and you didn't really see where his arc was going? I think that's perhaps where they sort of misused the time. But they probably they needed to cover him to some degree. I just think they maybe overdid him at times, and he ends up being like a kind of humorous character who they maybe overdid. Whereas like Varric's humor, he's also a character who's primarily humorous in his scenes. I think regardless of how much they used him, it never felt overdone. I think probably outside of Remembrances, where they just went full on, you know, the wackiness. So that's that little subplot that we get there. Speaking of Varric, Varric and Julie, I think what they do here is obviously like they've only got a small amount of time, and this again comes back to the fact that the book pretty much is only 12 episodes because Remembrances doesn't do any character development. Given all of that, and that they kind of only decided to do this Julie arc in the last book, I think, kind of like Prince Wu, they do the little bit of development for Varric and Julie quite well. I think Julie's one kind of works a little bit better because the shift from her kind of being a character who only says one or two things, is just told to do the thing and she does something, to actually like speaking a lot more, you getting behind her character and her wanting to change the dynamic of her relationship with Varric before they actually start a relationship, and that development actually happening here. And there's two main scenes, of course. The first one is on top of the radio tower when he does the EMP. He's telling her the story of like his pet ostrich horse, Mrs. Beaks. Now, the reference there potentially is that the first ever mover that he produced was of an ostrich horse running, is his first ever mover of that ostrich horse. And I think that in itself is a reference to like one of the first ever actual films in real life, where I think it was like filming a horse running. But I'm not particularly familiar with that sort of history, but I believe that was one of the like trivia notes that was going around at the time, and that ends up being a pretty cool reference to when that was shown, like back in book 2. But here's obviously where that sort of comes out, and that like, oh, so ostrich horse in real life, and then Varric actually had a pet ostrich horse. But the core of what's going on here is he's saying like he never, I suppose, he took Mrs. Beaks for granted, and he's trying to lead into this story where he's kind of saying that I also took you for granted. And I suppose part of the idea is that something bad happened with Mrs. Beaks. He maybe couldn't say how much he cared about his pet before she died, potentially, and he's not going to make the same mistake with Zhu Li, and was leading into basically what the second scene is about, up on top of the radio tower before they were interrupted. As for the secondary scene, the proposal, the engagement, I think it's really, really interesting, and it works because they did have some setup from before. Like the last episode, we saw a little bit of a scene where you could tell that like she cares about him, but she wants him to sort of change his attitude towards her before any sort of a relationship happens. Earlier on in the book, he saves her from falling off the train when the spirit vine goes off for the first time, and they fall on top of each other, and you had that romantic tension, and you sort of got it from both sides, but it was more so Zhu Li towards Varric than the other way around. Then since Zhu Li's been gone, you really see how much like Varric depends on Zhu Li, and it's not just a case of like he's lost an assistant. It really feels like he has lost his rock, the person who kind of keeps him on the straight and narrow, and he realized in that time how much he actually like deeply cares about her, and it's not just in an assistant type way, which he said when she initially came back. And so I think it's fitting. Like, is there an element of like, yeah, I do feel they probably could have warranted maybe explaining how they met in the first place. Like, they both seem to be water tribes, so like how did they meet for the first time? How did Zhu Li become Varric's assistant? It's probably, I think, the only thing that's really missing here. Otherwise, I think what's actually accomplished here works. The proposal, the dialogue. It's meant to be more of a. It's meant to be an odd relationship. It's meant to be one of those ones where like, it's only Zhu Li who'd be able to like see Varric in that way and like care about him that much. Anyone else would be like, he's way too odd. But Zhu Li respects the kind of odd genius that Varric has, and that works. And I think it's shown in the proposal of just like, would you do me the honor of like doing the thing forever, or whatever he says, and she being so happy at this, she says yes immediately, and it seems like he almost ruins it by saying, and let's go out to destroy this giant Colossus mech, and she's just like, actually this is how I always imagined our engagement. And that line in itself showing that that's something she's considered, that it's something she's dreamed of happening for a while. So it gets across how much she cares for Varric, that's engagement, marriage, is actually something she's thought about before within their relationship. So I think it works well. It adds to the setup going into the final battle of I'll discuss Asami and Hiroshi in just a second, that you bring two important relationships back together, And those two important relationships are going to be at the most risk going into the final stage of the battle. And you get the impression that something's going to go wrong. The newly engaged couple is going to be broken apart in tragedy, or the newly reunited father and daughter are going to be broken apart in tragedy. And we know obviously what happens. So let's address the other plot stuff, and that is Hiroshi and Asami. Hiroshi comes back in. Lin releases him from prison because they need more geniuses on board for this. And Hiroshi ends up coming up with the last stage of the plan that, they've already decided. Like, he basically says, okay, the way to destroy this thing is from the inside. We're not going to be able to like tear it apart from the outside. So we have to find a way to sort of stop it, get inside of it, and then we can do the damage. So that's a good plan. And then they realize that, okay, Future Industries has platinum cutting tools, but they're too big. But then Hiroshi's genius idea is to alter the welders that are on the suits already into plasma cutters by adding an extra element to them. And that's the key stage of the plan. And then just before they go out, we get the proper reunion moment of just Asami saying that she loves her father again, and him being so happy to hear that. As well as that, it is more redemption for Hiroshi in that you see that at a base level, he just loves the city, and he's here to protect the city because it's his city as well. And in that sense, you see why he puts so much effort in here, and as an extra way to, I suppose, redeem himself, he has to put even more effort in. Like, it's touch and go if they're going to get this done, and you can see when the both suits go out that, like, the Benders can only do so much on the ground because the Colossus is so big. They have to go huge with the bending to even make this thing move. That the Dragonbird suits are more or less kind of on their own, and they keep landing on specific spots, but then the Colossus is revealed to like be able to do like behind the back stuff. It's not really limited in its articulation or anything like that. And the setup of like Korra's giant waterbending move as being the thing that sort of seemingly stops it in place for good, but then the ice starts to crack, and you can see where they're going. They set this up perfectly with Varric and Julie get hit, they both eject, and they show specifically the box and that there's two ejector seats. One, they are separate, but Julie activates them both at the same time, so she and Varric get out safely. And the setup is that, okay, so you can actually eject one person and not the other. And that's exactly what they do here. Just before they're about to get hit, they're so close to getting through the skin. Hiroshi ejects Asami out, sacrifices himself, but I suppose he finishes the job, and the impact of the hit ends up kind of breaking the hole in the thigh, I think it is. And it's incredible because it is a pretty dark death. If you think about like what just happened to him, he was squished, basically, and that's pretty heavy to see such a kind of intense death happen, and especially after such an emotional moment that Asami has just got her father back, and now he's gone again. And it works because like that's been Asami's arc in the show. It's unfortunately her only arc, and it has to be linked so heavily with another character, but it is well done. The setup that she's close with her father in the earlier episodes, her having to side against him in book one, her, bringing the company back but still, having bad thoughts about her father, and then the start of the reunion earlier on here, that he is her only family member who's left, and she's willing to give him a chance because he potentially could have changed, and in prison he may have calmed down about this stuff, and it seems like, based on everything that he says, he's realized what's important, and that is his family, and that is more so than any invention, any need to change the city or something like that, that his most important thing is his greatest invention, the greatest thing he ever made, which was Asami. And that's why that line works, and what his, I suppose, sacrifice here works for, because he sacrifices himself to give them a chance, to give the city a chance to survive through all of this. And like that's where the episode ends. They all manage to get in, all of the key like hero characters manage to get inside this thing, but it's still at risk. Like, it's still active, but how quickly can they take it down before how much of the city is destroyed. So that's most of the key, like, I think, plot moments. Sue and Batar have a moment. That's an interesting one as well, because I think the Batar one is interesting in that if you look at Sue's reaction to Batar in terms of attempting to forgive him compared to her reaction to Kuvira, which we'll get later on, it feels like the writers just forgot, it felt like it's such a casual inclusion of that Sue and Kuvira is meant to be like mother-daughter. And then the writers just like, it feels like they just completely forgot about that wasn't a factor in their writing after this point, because I get there's an element of betrayal, heavy emotional betrayal because of what Kuvira did, but to be so lenient towards Batar and be like, it'll take time, but like we can get through this together, you know, as a family. She understands that like his heart's been broken, that he really did care for her, and he's been betrayed. Okay, the manipulation side of things comes up. It's sort of, I think in a way, wrongly almost takes all of the like guilt away from Batar, that like, oh, he was just being used. He still made that decision to go with Kuvira and side against his family. But they're saying that, you know, it'll take ages for them to forgive him, but it's possible. I think where I struggle with it is just that, like, you said that, like, Kuvira is Sue's like adopted daughter, and her reaction in the last episode is just like, you know, just throw her in jail, like, who cares? And it's like, why aren't you in any way giving her the chance of forgiveness? And that's where the hope of, like, you know, can we not, like, give Kuvira a chance here? Like, why aren't the comics, like, focusing on what Kuvira is up to and giving Kuvira a chance at redemption? But, like, I think that's more of a kind of the series approach to writing Sue and Kuvira and just their relationship as well. I don't think it's specifically a problem with this episode. It's just notable that you get her being very lenient to Batar here, and I get it because of the manipulation that was clearly involved, but she doesn't give like Kuvira really a chance either, and it's always felt weird to me how they did that. Other than that, before we get into this with the full action stuff, Jinora, I don't get why once again they have like just a scene of Jinora in peril, needing to be saved by other people, and that's her, like, it's her only involvement in this episode. Is like, oh, Jinora's in danger, she's nearly being hit by the laser, let's save her. And like, I think Tenzin pushes her out of the way. He gets doesn't get caught in the blast, but like at least the force of the blast kind of pushes him to the side, and like Milo has to save Tenzin and Iki has to save Jinora. And it's kind of like, why are you doing so much to like always have Jinora be in need of help this book? Like, I appreciate giving Milo and Iki that kind of saving someone opportunity, but like, you haven't really given Jinora anything this book, like, and even like doing that to Tenzin as well is kind of like, you know, give him his like hero moment. Like, they of course they get to lead the giant tornado thing that seems to actually really move the Colossus a bit, but I think I really wanted to just see like a big moment from Jinora in the finale, and we just didn't get it. And we, it's not that we just didn't get it, Jinora just like wasn't used. They actively did something that made her feel kind of like weaker as a character, and they've done that seemingly consistently over the course of the book. So I'd love to know what the writer's intent was about how they chose to use and write Jinora in this book after they'd done her development so well. What went wrong? Similarly, like, Kai is in this episode but doesn't interact with anyone. And again, Jinora and Kai don't interact once again. And is this just a symptom of the show being down an episode? And already, even if it had 13 episodes, I still think it'd be like bursting at the seams, like trying to fit in as much as they could. But and there's only so much space, and so, you know, I think there's just an element of like, there's a bit too much going on. They don't have enough time to do everything that they need to do, which is kind of one of Korra's major problems if you look at the series as a whole. But there's that. As for the action, I think the action is the strength of this episode for sure. Korra gets to use the Avatar state a lot. You see like Bolin team up with like Su, Wei and Wing, like Lin. They're doing huge earth-bending moves. Bolin gets a big chance to use lava, where they lock the foot to the ground, the cables around the legs, all the airbenders plus Korra in the Avatar state pushing it over. And Korra's amazing waterbending move. We haven't seen her use too much like waterbending outside of like the kind of water spout thing. She uses it a lot. It was really cool to just see her like, oh look, there's the river running through the city, and just launch all of the water up, ice it up, and that's basically what gives them the chance in the end. So I thought that was cool. One of the bigger moments of just like, that was awesome, was them pushing the building down on top of the Colossus, and Bolin playing a big role in that. He felt really, really powerful in this last fight, definitely, Bolin. It felt like he was doing a lot. Similarly, Korra in the Avatar state, when she was chucking those like huge chunks of the ground across like buildings at the Colossus, they felt impactful. I think they did a good job with the sound and just the way they shot the scene to get across that like she is hurling basically like a road at this Colossus, and it's obviously not. Kuvira doesn't want to get hit by these things, and she has to kind of guard the glass and stuff like that. But these are having a pretty big impact, and it gets across how powerful the Avatar state is. I would definitely say it feels like they didn't go all out with the Avatar state, but I think it is also a case of, even if she went full Avatar state, glowing eyes for the full time, did the whole like cyclone of all of the elements around her like Aang did against Ozai, I still feel like the Avatar state would have had to be kind of like the more kind of agile one, rather than kind of going on the offensive, just because they basically were saying that like only this plasma welding, that's the only thing that's going to actually break through the Colossus. And while the Avatar state, if it was allowed to like have just 5 minutes to try and break through the skin of the Colossus, it probably could. In that, like, I assume Avatar state assisted firebending. If she just burned the outside for a long time, eventually something would happen. But there's not enough time. She wouldn't be able to produce something like so powerful quickly that she'd be able to burst through. So instead they had her only like use the Avatar state in short bursts to make it really count. And I do think this is a case where, you know, she's thinking like, the cycle's already sort of ended once and we saved it. If I just go into the Avatar state now and try and take this thing head on, I'm probably going to like lose the Avatar state for good. The Avatar cycle will be broken. In that it felt like, yeah, even the Avatar state would probably be at risk against this thing, just because of how powerful its weapon is and how more or less invulnerable it seems to be. And that speaks to how well constructed the Colossus was. In Baatar saying that, yeah, the only way to shut it down is from the inside, turning both switches off at the same time, which is a setup for the next episode. But we'll see how that plays out. Otherwise, as I said, the action was very good. The airbender doing their kind of like, I think they've like joined hands and doing this big spiral thing, and they just create this kind of column of wind that really moves it. Was pretty intense getting across that. A lot of airbenders working together is exceptionally powerful, and that's what they showed in the Book 3 finale, and they're showing it again here. We didn't really see... I don't even remember Mako doing anything in this episode, which I think makes sense. Like, a single firebender, he's not going to be able to do all that much against the Colossus. His lightning... on the outside, I assume the implications as well. Like, he probably wouldn't be able to do anything there. Other than that, like, I think the only thing missing from this is that we didn't really get any bender on bender fights, which we get them in the next episode because it's much more kind of up close and personal. But I think we were sort of just missing an element of like the finale having that, I think, truly amazing bending fight. Kuvira Korra in the next episode is good, and I like that fight. It doesn't quite, I think, meet like series finale expectations, but we'll discuss that in the next episode. But I think that's more or less all I want to say. I think basically everything in this episode works. I don't think there's a massive amount to criticize it for beyond, I think, the Jinora stuff and just the kind of relatively poor or kind of thoughtless treatment of Jinora as a character, and just there kind of being a lot of minor characters around who aren't really doing much, who you actually do care about. Milo's plan, I didn't discuss that, and I thought that was interesting that they allowed Milo to just, he came up with a full plan that they, basically paint bombed the windows of the thing and used the distraction while they're cleaning that off to obviously work on the ground, because Kuvira is going to have to stop, focus on wiping it away from the top, and they could do stuff to the legs, because she's not going to immediately realize that people are attacking the legs. It was very clever on Milo's part, and it plays into the whole idea of like, oh yeah, Milo's actually an artist, like we know that he can draw and stuff like that, so of course he'd think of a sort of artistic solution to this, and seeing him execute that plan was fun, and just giving him a couple of big moments in this episode. He saves his father, he leads the attack with the water, the paint bombs, and then towards the end of the episode, he just latches onto the window and pulls this crazy face at Kuvira, which seems to freak her out a little bit, which I thought was a fun thing of just Milo's face is a weapon in itself almost. But very enjoyable episode. I think it's one of those ones where it's very good, but is it quite in the absolute upper tier of episodes? I'm not quite sure, because its big moment is, I suppose, the proposal with Julie and Varric, and then Hiroshi and Asami and Hiroshi's death. And I think those are big moments. It's just on both fronts, they feel a little okay, these are big moments for some of the kind of more minor, smaller characters in the series, and they work well. But it's not like the major characters are having major character development arcs within this episode, and I think that's potentially what is the thing that holds it back, in that the main characters are just kind of doing the fighting here, and it's more the minor characters who get a little bit of a chance to kind of have their bigger moments here, and it's just a little bit of a case of it being sort of unfortunate, especially for Asami, that her big book 4 arc basically is reuniting with her father. But that's my review for Day of the Colossus. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.